card here says mom and activist. Since what happened to me happened, I have turned to activism because my daughter is growing up in a state without bodily autonomy. My daughter is growing up in a state that lawmakers are telling her that she doesn't have a choice. It's one thing to put me through it. I'm a 29-year-old woman, but to put a child through something like that is inexcusable. And I would say that I'm hopeful that we can come to an agreement, a nonpartisan agreement, in our state capitol and restore abortion access so I can continue my plans of my future and expanding my family, because that's something I desperately want to do, but I'm terrified to do.
Thank you. American women deserve the freedom to make their own decisions. And, Mr. Chairman, this side of the dais trusts women.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry to interrupt. Followed by Senator Merkley.
Yeah. At the outset, I feel the need to point out something that I think the casual observer might miss from some of the comments. The Dobbs decision did not criminalize abortion. The Dobbs decision didn't do anything to affect the legal status of abortion other than to return the decision, the primary decision on abortion, back to the states. It concluded that this has always been an issue that was before the states prior to Roe versus Wade and its progeny. The Supreme Court in Dobbs simply undid Roe and said this is a decision that most of the time, that is, unless we're dealing with something in the District of Columbia at a military installation using government funds or something like that, isn't normally going to be federal action. And so they returned it back to where it was. Now, states have been more or less out of this arena for about 50 years. They had been out of the arena for about 50 years, as most abortions occurring in America couldn't be meaningfully restricted in light of Roe versus Wade and its progeny. States are getting back into that business now after it had been usurped by a judicial oligarchy of sorts for nearly half a century. And so, yes, states will handle this differently, but states handle many things differently. Everything from occupational licensing to what procedures might be performed in certain states. Even the criminal laws of one state differ from those of another. Those laws are made by men and women elected by the citizens of those states. Sometimes those laws can end up having unforeseen consequences, sometimes tragic ones. Those laws can be changed from time to time. But it's important to focus on what this is about and what it is not. It is, at the end of the day, something that is in the hands of the American people. This is part of what having a democratically elected government means. It's what it focuses on. I've heard several mentions made to the idea that there's suddenly going to be a national abortion ban, a federal abortion ban enacted. To my knowledge, Republicans who now control the House haven't even pushed for a vote on that elsewhere. Same can't be true of the Born Alive Protection Act. It's a different circumstance. When a child is born alive, I would hope we could all agree, regardless of what your religious, moral, or policy feelings about abortion are, I would hope we could all agree that once a child is born, there are all kinds of protections, and that allowing someone to be killed carries all kinds of other ramifications. Ms. Ford, I'd like to start with you. I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about the marriage penalties that exist in our current tax code and our social safety net at the federal level, and what harmful effects they might have on things like family formation. How do they harm, for example, married couples with children in a way that doesn't affect other families?
Yeah, I'd like to start by pointing out that marriage penalties in the safety net, which exist primarily in a program explicitly like the Earned Income Tax Credit, you can earn thousands more if you are unmarried and have children versus if you are married and have children. But they're also implicitly throughout the rest of our programs. For instance, if you don't declare the partner who you are not married to within the home, you can receive thousands more in SNAP benefits or TANF benefits or any other number of benefits. And the effect that we see that this has had on our culture is within the unmarried birth rate. We have the highest percentage of children living in single-parent homes in the world. It is about a quarter of U.S. children live in single-parent homes as compared to 7% around the world.
Are you suggesting we have thus incentivized out-of-wedlock birth and childbearing?
The information seems to be falling that way because when we track CDC data, if you're looking at college-educated women, fewer than 10 or 11% have children out of wedlock. That's roughly similar to what was happening in the 1960s. When you're looking at less educated women, it comes close to 60%. It really does hit on education levels and income levels whether a child is going to be born out of wedlock. And we know very clearly from the data that there is an impact to having two parents in the home. This is why Melissa Kearney's recent book, The Two-Parent Privilege, was published. She is not right-leaning. This is following the data. There is a huge benefit to having two parents in the home with the child.
How does that contribute to the perpetuation or even exacerbation of existing inequities along racial, economic, and other demographic lines?
We know that if there is a single mom or a single parent who is raising her child alone, she is much more likely to experience economic hardship, and it is much more likely for her children to experience intergenerational poverty. The 60 years that aid-dependent children with families was run in this country showed that economic outcome. This program, which provided cash assistance to mothers, by the mid-1990s, 9 in 10 women were unemployed, 1 in 7 children were on the program, and after it was reformed to focus on work, the out-of-wedlock birth rate stabilized. Women returned to work by nearly 20 points, and child poverty in this country dropped by 60%.
Human beings are rational actors, and when we incentivize the wrong things, sometimes we'll get those things, and those things can sometimes harm a lot of people, especially the most vulnerable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lee. The order I have at this stage, depending on attendance, is Senator Merkley, Senator Braun, Senator Padilla, Senator Kane, Senator Wyden. That's the sequence, but if people aren't here, you can be bumped up the sequence. Senator Merkley.
Thank you. Dr. Zahedi Spong, if in some states, I want to understand if an ultrasound reveals that the fetus does not have a heartbeat, in some states, would it be basically the law now require that woman to carry that child until there is a miscarriage, that child who does not have a heartbeat?
So I don't know of any states that require people to carry pregnancies that are true miscarriages. What I can say, though, is that with procedure bans around DNCs and DNEs, it can require patients who have experienced a miscarriage where the fetus's heart stops beating to deliver that fetus and undergo an induction instead of having a medical procedure that could end their suffering quickly.
Okay. That was exactly the situation we were in with our first child. We lost our first child at 4 months. And I think it would have been extremely difficult for Mary to be required by the state to carry that child post that point.
I'm sorry.
I want to turn Professor Myers to the poison pill riders that the House has proposed, including riders that restrict access to medical or medication of abortion. What would be the economic impact of passing an appropriations bill with some of these extreme anti-abortion riders?
Thank you for that question. The economic impacts could be tremendous depending on the rider, but I'd really like to talk about medication abortion for just a second, because mifepristone has become incredibly important to the provision of abortion in this country. Even before Dobbs, more than half of all abortions were provided as medication abortions. And right now, about 40% of the brick and mortar abortion facilities in this country only provide medication abortion. The remaining facilities, with very few exceptions, provide both medication and procedural abortions. If mifepristone access were meaningfully reduced, it would upend the provision of abortion in this country. It could end telehealth provision, which has become extraordinarily important to people. It could shutter providers, brick and mortar providers across the country, including in states that have been supportive of abortion rights and might not understand the threat that faces them. And it would create really limited appointment availability at many of the facilities that remain.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And Dr. Zahadia Bung, I want to turn back to you. Based on your experience now in Colorado, a state with expanded access to abortion after the Dobbs decision, have you seen an increase in the number of folks coming into Colorado from out of state?
We have seen, thank you for that question first up, but we've certainly seen an increase in the number of abortion care procedures that we're providing. Our group has seen an 8 times increase in care provision in the last year and a half since the Dobbs decision, in addition to about a 40% increase in procedural abortion care that's been seen. It's hard to quantify how much of that is from out of state versus just more patients needing the care and not being able to access it.
Has that created delays in the state for women's access to reproductive care?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there's only a certain number of us who can provide this care, given you have to have specialty training in order to do it, and none of us ever want to delay a patient receiving necessary medical care, but there's only so many hours in the day where we can actually provide that care.
Oregon has certainly seen that. It's reported that as much as 1,000% increase in patients crossing the state line from Idaho. Mrs. Phillips, thank you for sharing your story. Story I could connect with my own family's experience, though not all the pieces of it that were so powerful. Because of the restrictive laws in Tennessee, is it the case that your doctor was not even able to offer advice to you on how to obtain an abortion?
Thank you for that question, Senator. My doctor had taken an oath to provide the utmost care for her patients. And at that point in time, the way she understood Tennessee's law was that she could not offer me resources. She stated that I would have to do the research on my own. And then I was left to essentially defend myself and my own life and fertility.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all.
Senator Braun, followed by Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question will be for Mrs. Call. I'm going to kind of preface it with these comments. Colleagues before me have had questions about the nature of life and human essence, and I think have made the point that it's hard to distill that into economic terms. When you try to do it, especially through an institution that is now become one that has no problem with borrowing and spending money from future generations. Just to tell you where we're at there, this is the Budget Committee. We are now borrowing $1 trillion every 6 months. And you know whose back that's going to be upon? Our kids and our grandkids. That's probably a more pertinent subject to what we're talking about here today. But on the subject matter we got here, that has no good ending to it. That is about as bad a business plan as anyone would ever want to be a part of. But here, to try to speak about this in economic terms, I think from the state I'm from, this is a question of being pro-family, pro-mother, and that would be a place, I think, that would be a legitimate place to have a discussion, just not trying to even do anything about it if you're for it when you're borrowing it from your kids and grandkids. Indiana has effective public and private health care networks that help women without urging them to destroy an innocent life. The General Assembly's fulfillment of Indiana's culture of life includes the decision to disperse TANF funds to pregnancy care centers and an alternatives to abortion programs. Mothers should not feel alienated from assistance and forced into abortion. Sadly, the Biden administration embraces a culture that wants to do the opposite, to strip support for pregnant women and their unborn babies. I just think it's the wrong place to go. My question is, what do you tell young families and worried mothers when they need help with an unexpected pregnancy Should they be leaning towards that, taking the tools away from states that want to maybe talk about life and preserving it? What's your opinion on that?
Yes, so your question is what we tell families about that? Or I guess, can you repeat exactly what question you want me to answer? Sorry.
So when you have young families confronting these issues, what is your advice as opposed to what the Biden administration, I think, has been pushing, and take funds, borrowed money, to facilitate ending life? I mean, what should be the message?
Yeah, so I mean, what I believe the message should be is that there are people here who are very ready and willing to support you, and the state is ready and willing to support you. Our local community is ready and willing to support you. I'm very thankful in the state of Iowa, they recently passed the MOMS program, which provides state funding to centers like ours, so that we can truly support these women where they are. And I want to be very clear, we never suggest to a woman what she should or should not do. We just simply give her the information, let her know all of the resources that are available to her, because as it's been said, it can be tricky to navigate all of these systems and institutions, and so we're just there to be an advocate for her and to help her walk through that as she considers her decision.
And have you had any outreach from the Biden administration to help you in your programs?
No.
Zero.
Zero.
And I think that's just something, if you're going to try to push one dynamic, at least to be fair, it ought to be something that you're willing to do with the other point of view as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Then Senator Kane.
Just wanted to lead with a couple of data points. And I first, just thank you all for your testimony and participation today. It's important and timely conversation, obviously. About 42% of adults, up from 33% just about 5 years ago, say that they have either used fertility treatments or personally know someone who has. And there are currently an estimated 1.5 million frozen embryos nationwide. The recent ruling in Alabama effectively bans IVF in certain states because it would subject people involved in all steps of the process to unreasonable criminal liability. As Republicans continue to stumble over the flawed arguments against reproductive rights, what I see happening is they're realizing that it's one thing to say that you're opposed to abortion in theory, and it's a whole other thing to try to legislate in this new reality. Now, it's offensively hypocritical for so many House GOP members, for example, lining up to pledge support for IVF while simultaneously signing on to so-called parenthood legislation with no carve-out for embryos in clinics. My first question, Dr. Zahedi, how would you square Republican support for IVF with support for personhood legislation like the Life at Conception Act?
So thank you for that question, Senator. And if I'm understanding your question, I think the hardest part about all of this discussion is that reproductive justice is both about choosing when to have a family and choosing when not to, and then the safety around how you choose to parent your children as well. And the argument around IVF, they are, as in conjunction with the argument around why abortion care is necessary medical health care, is that you're taking away the autonomy of families to make the decisions that are best for them. And you're erasing grief and trauma for those families that are having to make decisions that are very difficult. Having known plenty of colleagues as well as friends who've had to undergo infertility treatment, that is a very difficult road for them. And then to have, their time and energy and responsibility taken from them by the state and told what they can and can't do with that is just as scary as what we're seeing with the patients who are coming to us for abortion care.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate the perspective as a physician in this, because for a party that claims to be about rights and freedoms and liberties, they're taking away rights and freedoms and liberties from families across the country. Dr. Myers, can you talk a bit more about the societal and economic impacts of banning IVF?
Yeah, and I'll preface it by saying, since this has been a bit of a mixture of the personal and professional, my oldest child is an IVF baby and the product of a frozen embryo transfer. This really hits close to home for me, seeing what's happening in Alabama. So reproductive autonomy isn't just about young people avoiding parenthood until they're ready. It's about all people being able to become parents when they want to. And IVF has helped millions of people, including me, and the economic evidence suggests that it allows women to spend more time seeking the right partner, investing in education, and investing in their careers. And in a country and moment when we're increasingly seeing people delaying parenthood, a lack of access to IVF is very concerning from an economist perspective.
Thank you very much. And if I can, in my brief time remaining, I do want to touch on another topic because I think as Dr. Zahedi exemplifies, there across the country are obstetricians, gynecologists, and nurses that are leaving their practices in states like Idaho, Texas, Oklahoma, and Tennessee, while new doctors are avoiding those states altogether. Facing the departure of respected and talented physicians, many hospitals have since closed their labor and delivery units in these red states. So the brain drain extends beyond just maternity care. Following the Dobbs decision, a growing number of companies have updated their health insurance policies to include abortion travel benefits. And it's because they recognize the impact that state laws restricting abortion care have on their ability to attract and retain talent. Dr. Zahedi, can you left Georgia and Tennessee, as you shared in your testimony, as a result of Dobbs and the state's abortion restrictions. I can imagine that Republican attacks on reproductive health care is driving obstetricians and other healthcare professionals from red states. How does this impact access to essential healthcare services, including prenatal visits, including access to contraception, including maternal fetal medicine and postpartum care, cesarean sections, and more in those states that are being left behind?
Thank you so much for that question, Senator. I have a deep concern for what's going to happen in this country as these rights continue being taken away. We know even prior to Dobbs that states that had abortion care restrictions had worsening maternal mortality and morbidity, and that was still divided and worsened across racial lines as well. So now that we're adding in the factor that physicians are afraid to be in states where there are significant abortion bans, you're eliminating an entire workforce. And in addition, almost 50% of the OBGYN residents in this country are training in states with abortion care restrictions. We will graduate an entire generation of OBGYNs who don't know how to do D&Cs for miscarriage management, who aren't equipped to counsel patients appropriately about the findings of their pregnancies, who aren't going to be able to provide necessary emergency medical care in these communities. And I'm very afraid what that's going to mean for their patients. Idaho, for example, has had multiple maternity wards close over the last several years as almost 25% of their OBGYN workforce has left. And there is maybe 2 maternal fetal medicine physicians left in the entire state. Patients are traveling 200 miles one way for prenatal care now. In a state that already had really, terrible maternal mortality and morbidity. I worry what that means for the residents of that state and how we're going to continue to watch women die.
Yeah. Senator Kane, and then
Mr. Chair, just in closing, because obviously we have and will continue to have fiery debates as policymakers, and we're seeing what impact it's had on medical professionals in states across the country. But the ultimate consequence, and this is why you're having this hearing, the ultimate consequences are on women and families, and that needs to be at the center of our actions here. Thank you.
Senator Kane and then Senator Van Hollen, unless Senator Wyden returns. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Phillips, your testimony was incredibly powerful, and I really want to thank you for sharing it. And the legal system of Tennessee in this country has really failed you. I was listening to Ms. Call earlier saying that in her work, she tries to inform people and tries to be non-judgmental and let them do what they choose to do. Your state does not let you do that. Your state does not let physicians do it. The fact that you have a physician who's taken an oath to provide you patient care is so afraid of criminal liability or loss of licensing privileges that when you're given this devastating news, you and your mom have to go online and search to find a place thousands of miles from where you live, far away from any family in a city that you've never visited, if I remember your testimony right, to terminate a failed pregnancy. I mean, it's just, the cruelty is astounding. Astounding. I mean, I just would like to go back and just clip that piece of the testimony from Ms. Call earlier. We want to accompany women and let them decide what's in their best interest. If that's what a healthcare provider testifies, why wouldn't a state legislature or a court system or a Congress have that same attitude? I want to push back a little bit on Senator Braun's notion. He was pushing a line that the Biden administration is interested in abortion and not on moms. And so let me correct that. The American Rescue Plan was the first piece of legislation that was passed under the Biden administration of the 117th Congress. And my colleagues and I were here, and it passed by one vote. One vote. Every Democrat voted for it. Every Republican voted against it. The American Rescue Plan included a really important provision for moms and kids. Prior to it, Medicaid would cover a mom after delivery for 90 days. More than half the births in this country are Medicaid births. Prior to the American Rescue Plan, moms would be covered for 90 days. In the American Rescue Plan, we allowed states to expand that 90 days to a year, where the mom gets covered for a year because there's so many challenges that mothers face post-delivery. That passed by one vote. Democrats did that. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did that. Every Republican voted against mothers. They voted against mothers. And guess what states have done with that mandate? We extended it in an appropriations bill the next year. 45 states have decided to embrace this optional mandate that we allowed them to do, embracing the Biden-Harris policy, embracing a policy the Democrats supported, and every last Republican in the Senate opposed. Mr. Chair, I imagine you've been here longer than me. There are days when you're here and you wonder if you do anything. Then there are days you're here when something happens by one vote. The American Rescue Plan. Moms get Medicaid coverage. We saved 2 million workers' pensions. Saving the Affordable Care Act in August of 2017 happened by one vote. The Inflation Reduction Act to bring down prescription drugs happened by one vote. The American Rescue Plan had another pro-mom, pro-family, pro-kid provision, the child tax credit, that reduced infant poverty by 45% within 6 months, passed by one vote. Every Democrat supported it. Every Republican opposed it. I gather from your testimony, Professor Myers, that one of the reasons that women often cite for terminating pregnancy is financial pressure. The financial pressure of health care expenses, the financial pressures of raising kids and finding child care. Knowing that you're going to be covered for health care in the year after delivery, knowing that you can get a child tax credit to help you with the expenses, these are the kinds of policies that are pro-mom and pro-family and might even help the U.S. deal with the declining birth rate and kind of turn it around. And we could start to have a growing birth rate again if families felt that they had a financial cushion and the financial pressure wasn't causing them to consider terminating a pregnancy. Am I right about that?
Yes, I think you are, Senator. Thank you for the question. American birth rates have been plummeting, and the reasons are very complex, but I think we should all be very concerned about that through multiple lenses, including a fiscal lens. And one of the reasons that people give for delaying becoming parents or having fewer children is financial concern. And so I will, I agree with Mrs. Ford that we could bolster the social safety net. We could reduce marriage penalties. I think that's a really good idea. But you just can't leave out the other financial concerns that affect families. And the child tax credit was an incredibly important piece of that social safety net. Expanding Medicaid is an incredibly important piece. Making welfare benefits more accessible, doing things like reducing child caps on them, right? There's so many other things we need to do to bolster the social safety net, and in doing so, we would likely help work against this concerning trend of declining births.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for your testimony here today. And Ms. Phillips, I wasn't in the room, but I saw your testimony on C-SPAN as the hearing progressed. And I want to thank you for being here and sharing your very personal story, and it does Miley Rose's memory great credit that you're here speaking on behalf not just of yourself, but as you said, millions of other American women. So now you've experienced a Senate hearing, lots of things have been said, and so I just want to give you the opportunity as we close. I may be the last senator to ask questions. After you've heard everything here today, is there anything that you would like to say in response and make sure that we can correct any misperceptions that some people have expressed?
Yes, and thank you so much, Senator, for giving me this opportunity. I will start by saying that I made a promise to Miley that her name would not die with her. So that is part of why my activism is so important to me, is so people know who she is. I want to make two statements before I go into my final thing that I would like the committee to know. I think it was Senator Kennedy came to this hearing knowing that there was going to be a mother here who had to make the difficult decision to terminate a 20-week pregnancy, and he decided it was in his best interest to show a 21-week fetus. And his testimony was nothing but fear-mongering. From my experience, that was not my experience, what he was trying to persuade. Also, Mrs. Call, to answer your question to what he had asked, my procedure was an abortion. It is on my medical paperwork that I had an abortion, even though my daughter was deceased. It's not back and forth. An abortion is a medical procedure, whether that fetus is deceased or not. But I would like to ask the committee to remember my story and to remember that I'm one of thousands, if not millions, of people in this country that need or needed abortion access, and to remember that it's not black and white and one size does not fit all. We can't be putting politics into healthcare decisions, and also to remember these facts, that abortion access is essential healthcare, no matter how you want to look at it. It's essential healthcare for so many, and exceptions don't work. I'm a living testimony to that. Tennessee had a very vague exception to protect the life of the mother. My life was at risk, and I did not qualify. I would ask the committee to consider passing a law that allows access without exception, just all across the board. Because when someone needs health care, they should be able to receive that health care when they need it and not have to navigate the hurdles like I did. Because like I said, I don't know if I made it to New York, if I would be here with you today. So I'm very thankful for the opportunity that I was given to get to New York, and now this opportunity to fight back against the extreme bans that we're facing in many states.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Thank you for your earlier testimony and that powerful closing. And Dr. Zahedi Spung, if I could just ask you to elaborate a little bit more on the real challenges doctors face in trying to navigate these legal, areas. Senator Padilla asked some of the questions I had planned to ask about the impact on doctors and their decisions to have to move to other states, and how that leaves, women in the workforce in states like Tennessee at greater risk. But it's because doctors don't want to end up being fined or worse for their actions. So could you, and I know from your testimony that, you call upon your fellow physicians to, when you were in Tennessee and others do, to try to navigate these things, and how it's a impossible standard. And Can you just talk about that kind of experience of having to go through these difficult decisions when people are talking about imposing legal penalties?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Senator. I'm a physician and not a lawyer. I did 11 years of training in order to become a doctor and trust my own clinical gestalt. And then a law went into effect that took my ability to care for my patients in the way that was necessary away from me. And from so many others. I'll never forget, after the days after Dobbs, the number of conversations I had with our hospital lawyers, my criminal defense attorney, the lawyers across the country who were trying to navigate the ever-changing experience for patients and providers. And I wasn't able to care for patients because I was trying to figure out if I could even take care of them. I had a hematologist call me and ask if he could give chemotherapy to a breast cancer patient who he had just found out was pregnant because he was worried that if he did and she miscarried, he'd go to jail for taking care of his patient. It is still terrifying. We navigate this on a regular basis with patients who are coming to us with very complex care, trying to make sure that they have all of the follow-up and care that they need back home while still protecting their privacy. It's untenable. And I am devastated I had to leave a place that I loved and a community that I cared deeply for. But I knew I couldn't do any good if I wasn't able to practice medicine anymore.
Yeah. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Let me thank all of the witnesses. There was a comment, a critique, Professor Myers, of your conclusions regarding the causal effect between reproductive care restrictions and the economy, and specifically the appropriate conclusions to be drawn from the Turnaway study. You have not had a chance to respond to that. I think in fairness, I should give you a chance to respond to that if you would care to.
I would. Thank you, Chairman Whitehouse. I'd like to return to that. So I want to say, first of all, very clearly that most of the evidence that I present and share in my testimony is not from the Turnaway study. There's ample evidence from multiple independent research teams using different natural experiments to isolate and measure the effects of abortion and access. So we're not just talking about the Turnaway study by any means. But when we are talking about the Turnaway study, that evidence is causal. And to illustrate, one of the most important studies to come out of that research project, and I want to be clear, it's not mine, this is another team, took people who were in the Turnaway study, they were seeking abortions, arriving at providers, and some of them were finding out that they were just past the gestational age limit to receive the abortion that they wanted, and they were turned away. And others were just under it and received that abortion.
Hence the name of the study.
Hence the name of the study. And the researchers connected all of these people to their Experian credit reports, and they followed what their credit reports looked like for months, years before this pivotal event in their lives. And the two groups trended incredibly similarly. They look really, really similar right up until the moment that this happens to them. And that's when there's this incredible divergence. And all of a sudden, the people who are turned away have this enormous increase in adverse credit events. I don't think a reasonable person can look in that evidence and say, that's just a correlation, something else happened that day that caused their credit to fall off a cliff.
All right, well, thank you for that response. Thank you all for your testimony here today. I know that Mrs. Phillips, this was particularly difficult for you, and one of our colleagues made it even more difficult, and I apologize for that, but I thank you very much for being here. The record will remain open in case anybody wishes to add anything for another week. But with that, this hearing is concluded.